LA Kings fans have a lot to say on part one of our fan feedback show following the week of the draft and free agency. We share it all on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show going into its 19th year, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. A happy Independence Day to you all. Hope you're having a great holiday weekend, and I know my stomach is feeling good after some barbecue. So I'm guessing we might have some fireworks on this show from some of the comments following what the Kings and GM Ken Holland did in free agency. We've got so much fan feedback. This is just part one of a two-part fan feedback show. So let's not waste any time. We've got a lot to get to. Let's get right into it. I'm going to read them in the order in which they were received. And we will start with Scott in Anaheim. He says, I was not going to write this week, but after the Spence trade, I wanted to send an email before the free agency signing started. I am very concerned about our new GM, Ken Holland, and what he's going to do to this team in the 2 years he's going to be here. All I hear right now is the first order for the offseason is to fix the defense and then work on the fillers. I agree with this. So why trade your third-line defenseman for nothing that can help you this year? I'm not a Spence lover. I think Spence was a serviceable bottom D and a good cap rate. And now we have to fill another D spot in free agency or with a trade. I don't see any value in trading Spence for picks in the draft. Why not wait? Worst case, you use him this year and then trade him next year. What I think will happen in free agency, I feel like Ed and Brea for saying this, I hope I'm wrong, we overpay for Gavrikov to the point of $10.5 million for 8 years. That will age badly. We'll also sign Kuzmenko to a 2-year deal for $7 million per year, re-sign most of the same core, including Lewis, but not Jeannot as he goes and plays third-line minutes for another team. And that was from Scott in Anaheim. Well, I guess you're happy that the Kings did not overpay for Vladislav Gavrikov. And if Andrei Kuzmenko would have gotten a $7 million a year contract, that would have been on the list of worst deals. I will say, though, I do agree on Jordan Spence. I would like to have seen him used to get someone to replace Gabricov or to get a third pairing defenseman not named Cody Ceci. We've talked about Bowen Byron of the Buffalo Sabres. He is supposedly going to get traded. That hasn't happened yet. I will be interested to see if he is traded, what the Sabres get in return for him. I wonder if Spence and a draft pick would have gotten it done, and Bowen Byron would have been an upgrade over Brian Dumoulin. And he's younger, and he's someone that you could have for years to come. Up next is Sean and Betty in Davis. Why is any Kings fan considering Keandre Miller on the Kings? Has everyone forgiven him for spitting on Drew Doughty? Maybe we should add Matthew Tkachuk and Darnell Nurse while we're at it. And that was Sean and Betty in Davis, California. I will be honest, I had forgotten about Keandre Miller spitting in Drew Doughty's face. I Googled it, and as soon as I saw it, it all came back to me. It was a game a couple years ago in New York. Certainly spitting in anyone's face is disgusting and certainly very disrespectful. So, yes, I get that. Although I would be willing to bet that Drew Doughty would be just fine adding Keandre Miller if he thought that he could help the Kings win. Drew has already reached out to Corey Perry and welcomed him to the team, which I think regardless of how you feel about Corey Perry, I think for Drew Doughty, that's a very classy move. I think it's a leadership move. Ultimately, you have no control over who's on the team, but if you're a veteran player, if you're kind of one of the faces of the franchise, I think it speaks well that you reach out to a guy regardless of the history and welcome him to the team. Certainly, if you look at Brad Marchand and the Florida Panthers, they had history. He comes over to their team. They forgive and forget, and they all seem to be getting on very well as he helped them to win another Stanley Cup. I'm not a Matthew Tkachuk fan, but I would be willing to bet if you ask Drew Doughty, who has a feud with Matthew Tkachuk, certainly when he was with the Calgary Flames, would you welcome Matthew Tkachuk to the Kings? I think he would say 100% absolutely, because he thinks he's the guy that can help the Kings win. So that's what he's all about, and I get that. I will say for K'Andre Miller, he got traded, and he signed a trade to Carolina, and the Hurricanes gave up a player and a first and a second round pick for him, and then signed him to an 8-year deal worth $7.5 million per season. So I will say I'm very glad the Kings did not make that deal for K'Andre Miller. Vinny in Spokane, Washington says, everyday listener, thank you. He says, and thank you for making my drives to work and home from work so great. Well, thank you for listening. He says, I am one that thinks Mitch Marner would be good for us. I know that it's hard to think that he could really help us in the playoffs, but if you think about who would be with him, like Kopitar and Kempe, or even Q, it takes the first line and will help them this year. I know he lived behind Matthews and Tavares, and he also has to deal with the Canadian media his whole career. I honestly think you let Gabby walk. We have the talent and some of our younger D-men, and it would give a chance to see them rotate in the lineup. Kemper had an unreal season. I feel like Copley could back him up. I was happy when he was playing for us a couple years back and thought he should have been starting in the playoffs instead of Korpisalo. Anyway, thank you for all you do. Go Kings go, and that was Vinny in Spokane, Washington. You guys know how I feel about Mitch Marner. I think our guest this week, Eric Stevens, did make a great point when he says, accurately so, that the Kings just don't have those elite type of players that you really need to have to contend for a Stanley Cup. Now, there are exceptions. I think the St. Louis Blues won a cup a few years ago, and they really didn't have any elite players on that roster. Some very, very good players, but no superstars. So it's possible, but a lot of things have to go right for that to happen. So from that standpoint, I certainly get adding a player of Mitch Marner's status on the team. I've just said, I'll repeat it one more time. I think if you pay a guy that much money, he has to be a difference maker in the regular season and the postseason. You mentioned letting Gavrikov walk, and you said younger D-men getting a chance. I honestly don't know who that would be. The only guy that's a younger defenseman now that Jordan Spence is gone, and other than Brant Clark, of course, is Jacob Overar. And, he's maybe a third pairing guy at best. So there really isn't any younger defenseman to get a chance if Gabricov was to walk and you just wanted to promote some players from within, unless you wanted to move like Brant Clark over from the right to the left. But I just think at his stage of development, you don't want to be doing something like that. And I don't know if Phoenix Copley is an NHL goalie anymore. I think the Kings were afraid of going to him, and then you find out he doesn't have it, and now you got to go out and get someone. So they just felt it was safer to get a guy like Anton Forsberg. But I don't like the contract of Forsberg for 2 years. I would prefer to sign a backup goalie to just a 1-year deal. So I wouldn't have been opposed to giving Phoenix Copley a shot to see how he did, but I understand why the Kings did what they did as well. Scott checks in. He says he is in beautiful Simi Valley. He says, nice work on the draft coverage. Thank you. In 1 year, the Kings went from possibly their best draft production ever to an untraditional drag. Oh, I'm sorry. He says in 1 year, the NHL went from possibly the best draft production ever to an unintentional drag that was okay for the players, but a clunker in all other respects. Talking about the way the draft went this year, not just for the Kings, for the whole league. Hopefully they return to last year's format. Not a big Spence fan, but the Kings got the short end for sure, and I'm surprised Holland went for it. Oh, well, maybe they were looking at using the modest cap savings for a bigger defenseman of their choice. Rob Blake was a bit loose in managing assets. Let's hope his bug isn't contagious. Mark Giannetti has created a good job selecting prospects. Not an excellent job, but a solid one. My gut feeling is that they're too reliant on analytics and convenience, such as picking groups of players from the same programs. You can hammer on a keyboard all you want, but there's no substitute for watching as many kids play as you can. I found it curious that all of our goaltending prospects are about the same height. Not that they're short as Rogie Vachon, but more and more players are picking the top corners these days, and several keepers selected around the Kings picks were big, tall kids. but having 8 selections is a nice way to recharge the prospect pool and address our shortage of right shot forwards. So the Kings drafted 5 lefties. To be fair, these kids are years away from being available, but I found that a little strange. That was Scott in Simi Valley. Well, most players are left shots, which, by the way, if you don't know, that means you're right-handed. So about 80 to 90% of the people in the world, I think, are right-handed. So I don't think you can get caught up when you're drafting a player saying we got to get, right shots or left shots. I think you pick the best player available. And if it's a choice between, maybe there's a kind of a dead heat between a couple of guys, one's a right shot, one's a left shot, they play the same position, maybe that's the tiebreaker. But I don't think that would be a big factor when it comes to evaluating players. Dario in Arizona sent 3 emails, but they were all brief, so it was easy to combine them into one. He says, do you think the Spence trade was a Holland trade or a Yannetti trade? As for the free agent signings, Kuzi was good. Perry was interesting. Never imagined that. Forsberg was okay, but the other signings to me were not good. We need to get younger, faster, bigger, and stronger. Plus, the terms were so bad. I think Gavi made up his mind weeks ago where he was going. At least, told the Kings right away he was not coming back. I would have called the Rangers and said, we're not going to sign Gabricov. We want Miller. Can we work a trade? Eric Stevens also mentioned about the Russian community in New York and how Gabricov was interested in that. I did see that weeks ago. 4 years for CC. Should have traded for Byram. That is Dario in Arizona. Well, I said earlier, the Keandre Miller price I thought was way too big. I don't see how, if Gavrikov had made up his mind he was going to New York, they probably would know that. So why would they accept a trade from the Kings and give up anything when they were going to get Gavrikov in free agency by not giving up anything? And then they trade Miller and they get a player and a first and a second. So I don't know that the Kings could have worked out a trade for Gavrikov because I'm pretty sure the Rangers knew he was coming. So they didn't need to give up anything to get him. As for your question, if the Spence trade was a Holland trade or a Yannetti trade, that's all Ken Holland. Any player trades off the roster, that's a GM move. Any draft day trades like Yannetti moving back and picking up the second round pick, that is a Mark Yannetti move. We're just getting started. We got plenty more emails to come. Hope we can get a lot of them in. We're going to try and get as many as we can. It's just part 1 of a 2-part fan feedback weekend. That's coming up next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends and family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it possible. They make buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Gametime is the official ticketing partner of Locked On Major League Baseball, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming game for the Dodgers or the Angels. Gametime has last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings like 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA Club World Cup matchups. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Our next email comes from Sasan in Westwood. He says, why does it seem so hard for the Kings front office to attract key free agents to Los Angeles? I keep hearing fans on various social media platforms blaming things like high state income tax, a lack of sports culture in Southern California. It's so weird to me because as a fan of other sports teams in the area, Dodgers and Lakers, LA is usually marketed as the place to be. And it's generally considered to be a top 1 or 2 spot in the market, usually to the chagrin of fans from smaller market teams. And we see the other teams in Southern California shell out tons of money to attract quality free agents, etc. So I don't really buy that explanation. As for a lack of sports or hockey culture, I mean, sure, we're not Toronto, but I would think if teams like Florida, Tampa, Dallas, and Vegas are all able to attract a large hockey fan base and key free agent talent, why not Los Angeles? Is there a negative stigma associated with playing on the Kings? Is the fact that the Kings are traditionally a more defensive-minded team something that pushes away potential free agents who are less defensive inclined? Is the relative lack of media coverage of the LA Kings nationally compared to other teams a reason why free agents tend to sign elsewhere? Is the lack of recent postseason success and recent turnover of the head coach and GM position the factor that might lead to potential free agents not signing with the Kings? And that was Sasan in Westwood. It is a great question. The answer is probably multi-layered. I do think the high state income tax and the high cost of living plays a factor, but I don't think it's the factor. Lack of media coverage, frankly, I would say is something that players actually would like. I do think the Kings style of play is not attractive to offensive players. For example, I've said I do not believe Mitch Marner would score over 100 points in the Kings system. I think he could get around 85. And obviously you get paid more money if you are a 100-point producer, because your agent can say, this is how much a 100-point producer gets paid, and demand a salary, that's commiserate with that. So I do think that that is a factor. I know some people have said that players don't want to play for Jim Hiller. Frankly, I don't buy that at all. Sure, Jordan Spence did have a falling out with the head coach and the coaching staff, but look, there's usually a player or two that has an issue with their playing time, where they're playing or how many minutes they get. So that kind of thing isn't exclusive to Jim Hiller and the Kings. I think in large part that the Kings like playing for Jim Hiller. I do think, though, there could be a trust factor as far as what happened in the playoffs. Mike Lopez from Bermuda Dunes checks in. I had to look up where that is. It's near Palm Springs. I love figuring out where places are. He says, Eddie, I just saw the report of Gavrikov signing for $7 million with New York. Why didn't we spend that for him? I'm very disappointed at this point. And that was Mike in Bermuda Hills. Short and sweet. It's Bermuda Dunes. Short and sweet from Mike. I think you have every right to be disappointed. I think the problem is we don't know that Gabricov wanted to re-sign with the Kings. He simply may have wanted to play with the Rangers for whatever reason. I know some have speculated that he was upset that maybe when he and Anderson played so well together in the top pairing, and then Doughty came back, that he had to kind of take a reduced role. But I got to believe that Vladislav Gavrikov knew when Drew Doughty was going to come back, he was going to basically take his old spot back. I would be surprised if he was somehow shocked and upset about that. I kind of thought that everybody kind of figured that out. But ultimately, I don't know that we'll ever know why he decided to go to the Rangers if the LA Kings are willing to give him 7 years, $7 million a season. And we don't know that they were. $7 million a year, the Kings absolutely would have done. It seems to me maybe they didn't want to go with the 7 years. Sergio in San Jose checks in. He says, I'm an everydayer. Thank you, Sergio. I appreciate all you do for us Kings fans. In my opinion, there's no better daily podcast of my favorite sports team out there. Well, I appreciate that, Sergio, but I think I'm the only daily podcast on the LA Kings, but I appreciate the compliment. I'll take one anywhere I can get it. He says, keep up the great work. I'd like to get your take on why you think some players don't seem to want to come to LA. They are good. They're a good team. The city has plenty to do, good weather. There are reports about players like Rasmus Anderson, Brad Marchand, et cetera, not wanting to accept a trade to the Kings. Now, after seeing what Gavrikov signed for with the Rangers, anyone can read between the lines that he wanted out as well. Just curious about your thoughts, Sergio in San Jose. We've talked about it a little bit before. LA is not for everyone, just like New York is not for everyone, or Toronto is not for everyone. So it comes down to a personal decision. I don't know what the situation was with Rasmus Anderson. As far as Brad Marchand, he wanted to play for a cup contender. And when your choice is the defending Stanley Cup champs or the LA Kings, that seems like a pretty clear choice, right? I don't know that it's necessarily a slight to the Kings, but as I said, I do believe the Kings style of play is something that some offensive players may not be willing to or wanting to go play for if they have a choice, if they have another option. And, like I said, Marchand, Florida or LA, Marner, Vegas or LA. I don't know that those are necessarily slights to LA. I think they're just that those other situations were better in those particular cases. Ruben Guzzi Gabriel from West Covina checks in. He says, Eddie, every day are here. Thank you, Ruben. Just stopped by to say that I am pleased with the Kuzi signing. He gave the Kings a much-needed spark ever since the trade from Philadelphia. The one-year contract was just enough to show the Kings what he has to offer. Hopefully, Kuzi gives the Kings more of the same spark and energy and cohesion this coming season. Fun fact, my childhood nickname is Goozy, and I loved it last year that my friends would say Goozy cheering for Kuzi. Anyway, Gabby needed to sign with the Kings. I hate seeing him walk. Not sure if you've been asked this, but if you were Ken Holland, in Ken Holland's shoes, what would you have done? Keep up the good work, Eddie. I tell my wife all the time, you're my favorite podcaster. Go Kings, go. Go Rain, go. That is Ruben Guzzi Gabriel in West Covina. I have said that my two biggest moves, if I was the Kings GM, going into free agency was re-signing Gavrikov and bringing in Brock Besser. I'm frankly still shocked Besser re-signed in Vancouver. It seemed like both sides had moved on long ago, so that was a real surprise. Again, I don't know if Ken Holland offered Gavrikov 7x7 and then he said no, or if he didn't. So, it's hard to say. If I was Ken Holland, I would have given Vladislav Gavrikov 7 years at $7 million per year. I would have done that. Now, would that have been the difference maker in him signing with LA over New York? I don't know, but I would have given him that contract. Dan from Huntington Beach checks in. He says, I'm going to cut right to the chase with this. I know Ken Holland tried to retain Gavrikov with 3 different offers. My understanding was the term was agreeable to both sides, but the dollar amount was the issue. I was assuming Gavrikov was going to get between 8.5 and 10 million with the Rangers, which I felt was an overpay. When I read he got 7 million, I was stunned that we didn't sign him. What do you think happened? Do you think Ken Holland thought this was an overpay? Was the Holland offer in the 6 range? Or do you think Holland moved to plan B when Gavrikov didn't sign before free agency and Gavrikov was stuck with the number the Rangers offered him because Holland had moved on? I'm shocked that we lost him for a $7 million cap hit. I'd love your thoughts on this and the signing of Corey Perry. Really? I understand we haven't had a garbage goal scorer since Dustin Brown, but this is tough. I hate that guy. I feel so dirty inside, Dan, in Huntington Beach. Well, I'm with you on Corey Perry. It'll be very difficult to see him in a Kings uniform. I don't know how that will go. I can't see myself ever getting used to it. I can't see myself really embracing him, even if he plays well. I'll be happy for the team, though, if he does. As far as Gavrikov, again, my understanding was it's not the money, but it was the years. That's what I had heard, that LA was fine giving him the $7 million. They didn't want to give him 7 years. So that's what I have heard. It seems like you were saying the opposite, but from what I've heard, it was the years, not the dollars that the Kings didn't want to go in on. Which I don't understand. I've said this before, but the Kings are in it to win it now, supposedly. Ken Holland's not going to be here 7 years down the line. So what does he give a damn how Gavrikov plays in his 5th, 6th, or 7th year? What we care about is how he plays in the first 3 years of that contract. So that's surprising. All right, we still have more emails to get to. We will do that here next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Andy in Guelph checking in. He says, Perry, ugh. I've hated that guy since the OHL junior days when he played against the Storm. Aside from that, it's a good signing. I like Armia for the 4th line and penalty kill and the Forsberg move for backup goalie. I can't understand the D moves. CC, he's a plug. Sorry, but I hope to be proven wrong. Dumoulin at $4 million just seems wrong, but he could be better than Edmondson. I can't believe Gabby left for only $7 million. I thought for sure LA would trade for Byram or Keandre Miller. There has to be a move made for a top 6 forward. No, I still think we're one of the top 3 in the Pacific, but I'm dissatisfied with the D moves. I'm predicting 25 at minimum for Kuzmenko for 50 points this year. We need QB and Clark to erupt this season. At this point, I'm ranting but mostly optimistic, I think. Reports Rantanen didn't want to be in LA. Now Rasmus Anderson and even Marner prioritizing Vegas. Is this an issue that star players are staying away from? And if so, why? And that was Andy in Guelph. We've talked about it already. I think Marner picking Vegas is not a surprise to me. We've talked about the reasons why, no state income tax, a team that has had more playoff success, including winning a cup recently. And look, Vegas, the Golden Knights are the number 1 team in that city. It's not the Raiders. It's the Golden Knights. Trust me. So I don't know that particular one is a slight in LA. For Rantanen, I think we talked about style of play. He was looking for the right fit. He obviously said no to Carolina, and they were willing to pay him. So again, he just didn't feel like he fit there. I don't think he felt like he fit in LA. I don't know about the Rasmus Anderson situation. I don't know about that report or not. So you said there has to be a move for a top 6 forward. And I know you wrote that email right after the first day of free agency, but like I said, I would be surprised if the Kings add anyone else. And I don't know who else they could add if they were looking to upgrade for a top 6 forward right now. There really isn't one available. So I just don't think that's going to happen unless they make a trade. Mike in Reno says, why couldn't LA spend $7 million on Gavrikov? I thought the issue was that he was going to want 8.5 or 9 million. I'm perplexed why they didn't sign Gabby at 7. Aside from Hiller not liking Spence, I think Gavrikov and Spence are far better than CC and Dumoulin. Spence is going to stick it in our face next year, having a 35, 40 point plus season. I just see this as a downgrade defensively, like the Perry signing, although I think we could have done better than Armia. There are a couple of good players that were traded for draft picks before the draft that would have been way better. Glad Kuzmenko was signed. Just hope Holland and Hiller know what they're doing. But does anyone else get the feeling Holland made a bunch of today's free agent signings based off the players that these guys used to be? It's like Holland really wanted familiarity. Kings just got quite a bit older in a single day. And that was Mike in Reno. I think if we take the contracts out of it, I think CC can give the Kings what Spence gave them, but certainly he's bigger and stronger. And if Hiller has confidence in him, we can actually have 3 pairings play in the playoffs. Then that would be an upgrade over Spence, at least from a coaching standpoint and wanting to play the player. Spence had 28 points last year and CC had 24. Now, CC was playing on the first and second pairings in San Jose and Dallas, so he had more minutes to produce, but he's also a defensive defenseman where Spence is supposed to be an offensive defenseman. I would be surprised if Spence gets 40 points or more with Buffalo. He's still going to be a third pairing guy, and he's on one of the worst teams in the league, but we shall see. Peter in Vail, Colorado says, I listened to your podcast on the Kings free agent signings, and like you, I was both mystified and disappointed. My initial reaction was that the Kings were not better than they were last year, and I'm beginning to rethink that. There is one very important thing that all the signings Ken Holland made have in common. Every one of them, other than Anton Forsberg, has been on teams that have made deep playoff runs recently. Dumoulin won 2 cups in Pittsburgh. Perry won in Anaheim. He's been to the finals the last 5 years. Yes, on the losing side, but at least he got there. CC went to the finals with Edmonton, made a run with Dallas, and Armia went on a deep run with Montreal. As you pointed out, these additions bring needed size as well. Perry and Armia are also right shots. Perry was very effective on Edmonton's power play, and the Kings did not have a player who was willing to muck it up and drive goalies crazy like Perry. I understand your visceral reaction to having Corey Perry join the Kings, but I don't share it. I just want to win. And if there is something about that guy that makes teams win enough to get to the Stanley Cup final. Gabricov had a career season last year, so the Rangers may be signing him at his peak. I don't think Dumoulin is much of a downgrade on the left side, and the third pairing of Edmonton to CC is respectable, though more expensive than I would like. I have to believe Gavrikov did not want to sign in LA because the Kings most certainly would have been willing to pay him more than $7 million. Maybe Gavrikov thought the coaching decision in the playoffs were so bad that the Kings were not going to hold Hiller accountable, and he didn't want to make a long-term bet on the organization. Maybe he wanted to play with the fellow Russians, Panarin and Shesterkin. Who knows, but I don't believe he's gone because the Kings wouldn't pay him as much as the Rangers. So if Gavrikov is not going to sign, given what was out there, Dumoulin and CC is not a bad way to round out the defense. I'm actually more disappointed we had to settle for Kuzmenko as our right shot offensive weapon rather than signing someone like Besser, who has been a more consistent offensive threat, but I hope 96 proves me wrong. None of the moves Holland made is a big splash. That is a game changer. But on balance, I think the team is better. Whether it is better enough to win a playoff series, we won't know until next year. And that was Peter in Vail, Colorado. Good email, Peter. I don't have too much to add. I do think most Kings fans probably feel the way I do about Corey Perry, but obviously not all. I'm a bit more positive about the Kuzmenko signing maybe than you are. As long as CC's on the third pairing, I'm okay with what he might bring, to the team. But I still, like you, don't like the contract that he got. All right, we're down to one final email as time is ticking. This is from Aaron in McKinney, Texas. He says, old Puck podcast listener and contributor, now a daily listener to Locked On LA Kings. I'm so very glad you're the Kings representative in this regard. Thank you. I love listening to your daily wrap-up while I have my morning coffee at my boring workplace. Concerning Holland's moves on July 1st, I'm not thrilled about the acquisitions, but I'm not totally disappointed. He has a job to do, and some players not wanting to be in LA anymore, he has to plug in the holes where he can. We can compare numbers all day long, but the bottom line is we have no idea how these players may or may not gel together. Time will tell. People seem to forget in 2012 that team had no superstars, and I'm certain nobody picked them to win the cup at the start of the season or even at the start of the playoffs, yet they plowed through everybody on their way to hoisting the cup. Either way, I've seen fans state that they're jumping ship as a result of the fourth consecutive first-round loss or these offseason moves, and I say good riddance. I appreciate these fans don't recall the lean years from 1994 to 2009. While they have the right to become fans of other teams, I'm okay with their exit, and I will add, what your wife said about the Perry signing is almost exactly what I texted to my wife when I found out. Among all the players on the Oilers, I despise Perry the most. And like you said, if it helps the Kings, I can subdue my hatred for a season and hope he becomes an asset to the team we love. Also, imagine if the Kings do manage, dare I say, win the cup with Perry on the squad. All those people claiming he's a bad luck charm because he got to consecutive cup finals, but lost all of them, would have to eat their words because the Kings achieved the championship with him, something the Stars, Canadiens, Lightning, and Oilers couldn't do. Here's to positive thoughts for the 2025-26 season. Go Kings, go. And that was Aaron in McKinney, Texas. Love the positivity of our final two emails. There's not a lot of positivity out there, it seems like, for the Kings, but as you guys said, we aren't going to know until after the season. And there were not many people who, after the free agency signings last year, would have said that the Kings were going to tie the franchise record for wins and points in the season. And that's what happened. So I will disagree a little bit about the 2012 cup winning team, because you did have Kopitar kind of as a Selke finalist type of a guy. Doughty was a Norris Trophy kind of type of a guy, and Jonathan Quick was a Vezina Trophy type of guy. So there were three pretty good players, all future Hall of Famers, pretty much in their prime at around that time. And I mean, heck, the current LA Kings could use a Justin Williams type of a player as well. So that team, you're right, no one was predicting they would win a cup that year for sure, but there were some pretty good players on that team. If you sent an email and I did not read it on today's show, I will try my best to get it in on our next show. I'll be honest, we have so many emails still to go. We might have to do a third fan feedback show, or maybe we save them for next week. I don't know. I'll have to make a decision on that. But either way, thank you to everyone who took the time to email this week. This show, literally not possible without your participation. If you want to send an email for a future feedback show, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, the email address. Love for you to leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. And if you are interested in some Kings extra content, email me, lakingsextra@gmail.com for the details. If I haven't responded and you have emailed, I will get to that soon. Stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Locked On LA Kings, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great holiday weekend. We will talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.